and just try and tamp down that part of your brain that wants things to be really beautiful right away. And approach it with like curiosity and excitement and experimentation. And I think it's a really fun way to look at the world.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of Get the Picture, a podcast for beginners and people wanting to improve their photography. I'm your host, Brad Sigal. To start with, I want to ask you, like every podcast you listen to probably does, to follow, like, and subscribe to Get the Picture on all the platforms. And if you like this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and write a positive review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, because it really does help people find us. I'm really excited for today's guest, who's going to teach us, including teach me, a lot more about a less well-known type of photography of intentional camera movement. The usual assumption that most people have in photography seems to be that the holy grail is to eliminate motion blur entirely and get perfect focus and use the best equipment so you can get tack-sharp image from the center of the frame to the edge of the frame. Intentional camera movement seems to throw all of that out the window and embrace motion and embrace blur. And so I'm really thankful that my friend and fellow Twin Cities photographer, Daniela Bell, is here joining us today so we can learn more about this seemingly counterintuitive type of photography, intentional camera movement photography. Welcome, Daniela.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start with introducing you. Who are you and how would you describe yourself as a photographer?
Yeah, I would describe myself as a photographer as someone who uses abstract images to convey something. So usually it's something like emotion or an idea. Rarely is it like conceptual, but that concepts can come into it. So I'm much more interested in capturing the feeling of a scene or an object or whatever it is that I'm shooting, how it makes me feel, how I think it might make other people feel, how to transform patterns into something, lights and darks and contrast into something more abstract, less realistic. So that's what I would say I do as a photographer. It's much more sort of creative. It's on more the creative photography side. And I love looking at things and figuring out how they make me feel. So I was trained professionally as a scientist, as a ecologist. So I'm really into observing things, really into looking at things for like a really long time, and that's longer than most people would be interested in. But so I bring that practice of observing things closely and always being aware of what's around me, how the light is hitting something, all of those things. And then I add that creative part into that observation so that I'm recreating something more or something else than what we would see with sort of our eyes and the physics that our eyes and our brains are telling us. So that's I would say that I'm definitely an abstract photographer, abstract expressionism, abstract impressionism are other ways of describing my style of photography or my approach.
That's really interesting to me that you talked about your scientific training as an influence, and that makes a lot of sense. I also, when looking at your images, your intentional camera movement images, what came to mind, one thing was impressionism or different types of painting, more abstract painting styles. So I definitely want to talk more about that. But can you tell us a little bit more about your photography journey? When did you start with photography and how did it lead you to this type of more creative style?
Yeah, so I started with film, like many of us of a certain age.
Yeah.
In high school, took a photography class, and then I was a photographer for the yearbook and all of that stuff, and developing my own photographs. So I did that all through high school. I had a little, single lens reflex camera. And I loved doing that. And then I was very creative in high school. I did a lot of art stuff. And then when I was also into biology, but then when I got into college, I got like sort of laser focused on the science stuff and sort of left the creative stuff behind.
Hmm.
Um, and so then I would just take pictures of like my friends at college, like point and shoot, because we didn't have phones then. But um, and when my daughter was born, she's 17 now. I bought a digital camera, single lens reflex camera, so that I could take good pictures of her. So I had that, and I was taking lots of pictures of her, especially when she was a baby. And then uh, the real change came when we moved to Oaxaca, Mexico in 2018. Oaxaca is it's so full of color, it's so full of art, it's so full of culture that like that creativity, that desire to capture some of that was just like completely overwhelming and I just couldn't stop. And I was still sort of like finding my way
Hmm.
in terms of how I wanted to capture things. Because I wasn't really a landscape photographer. I wasn't really a uh, like architectural or street photographer. So I didn't really know. I couldn't fit into any of those like little categories. So I didn't really like, I'd go to like when we came home and I would go to National Camera, it's a shop here in town. And I'd say, I'm looking for a new lens. And they're like, well, what kind of photography do you do? And I'm like, no, I hadn't
Like, want to
really,
put you in a box.
I know.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah. So, and so then the funny thing about intentional camera movement is I was on Instagram at the time. I'm not anymore, and I kept seeing these photographs by this one guy, and they were mostly seascapes, and they, were just this like very smooth, series of lines that were like clearly the ocean, but not like if you just took your camera out and took a picture of the ocean. Um, and so I was like, what is that? And I was like, how do you do that? How do you like, I couldn't figure it out. And then finally, some other photographer actually put hashtags on their intentional camera movement image with, hashtag ICM. And I was like, oh, good. Now I have something I can search for. So then I searched for that and, found some videos about like how-tos. And then so then I just started and I loved it right away. I'm not saying my pictures were any good. I thought they were great because they were just super different from what I'd been doing. But, um I just really fell in love with it because it just takes out lots of detail, takes out any notion of like, this is something real that we're gonna go out and see. And so like you can have two ICM photographers next to each other, even with the same settings on their camera, the same kind of movement, like twisting the camera or moving it up and down. And those images are gonna come out completely different. So I loved that it had this spontaneous nature, this completely individualistic kind of nature that captured, maybe something that we can't see with our eyes, but we could see with like, I don't want to get like woo-wah-y because I'm really not a woo-wah. Something that you see with some other sense, um, other than your eyes, like the some like the spirit of the place or your own spirit or whatever. Just something that's not necessarily real, but capture something intrinsic to the thing.
I thought that was great and really helpful. Your journey of photography could have been like a copy paste of mine. I guess it's the Gen X photography journey, right? I remember seeing the images that you would share when you were living in Oaxaca and the colorfulness and your development as a photographer at that time. I think that is definitely really resonates with my memory of the development of your photographic style. Could you maybe describe some of your favorite ICM images that you've made? Like, you talked a little bit about how you do it in terms of, you sort of shaking the camera, but what are some things you've taken images of that you have been really proud of?
Yeah, there's one photograph that um I was taking pictures of a desert scene outside of Tucson, Arizona. And I'd been practicing for a while by then, but when I got it back home, it was the first time that I really felt like, "Oh, that's kinda what I want from an abstract landscape." Like, you can tell it's a landscape. You can't really tell that there's, like, cactuses and mountains, but there's something going on there, and there's actually, like, a lot of blue in the image. There was no water in the image, um, but it made me feel like I was in that desert scene, like how I felt when I was standing there. And I grew up in the high desert of Arizona, so it's some place that's really means a lot to me and brings up a lot of emotion to me. So I was really happy with that, and it's the kind of blurry that it's not like a sweeping motion. It's more sort of I was just sort of shaking the camera a little bit, so it just kind of like blurs all the edges, and you've got like patches of light and color,
Hmm.
and then darkness, and then somehow you get like weird colors coming in, like blues and greens. That like this is the desert. Uh, so it's really kind of, sometimes it feels a little magical. You're like, "Well, how did I do that?"
Yeah.
But, and then more recently, I've been adding to my abstract photography practice multiple exposures. So the other image, that I really love uses both ICM and multiple exposures in camera, but kind of and we can talk about this later. It's kind of weird multiple exposure. It's not just like regular multiple exposure. But so I love this photograph. I took it in Cornwall, in the far west of Cornwall. I went there for an ICM photography workshop for my 50th birthday. And I had to go back, honestly, like this morning when I knew I was going to talk about this image, look at where I took it because I like you cannot tell. It is completely abstract. It really bears very. It turns out it was we were standing on the cliffs at Land's End. And so that's where I took the photograph, and so that's what the photograph is of, like, cliff sides and ocean, but, because of the way that I used the movement as well as multiple exposure to take out parts of the image, and lay other parts of the scene onto parts where they are not, like, so, like, I moved the cliff over through the multiple exposure over the ocean in a shape that doesn't, you know, exist in the real world.
Hmm.
And so that's I would say, like, sort of also a timeline of where I've been, like, where I was taking single ICM images to now taking more often than not, taking multiple exposures, that include some ICM.
I think as you're saying all of that, the thought that's in my head is that I know a painter, an artist who had a conversation with, and he said to me, like, he's always thought of painting, for example, as art, whereas photography, like, he'll take a picture of something or of someone and then use that to do a painting of them. And so it's like, yeah, a photo can help you in the process of creating art, but not thinking of photography as an art. So I think all photography is art.
I
That
agree.
said, I think in the age, especially now, of social media where we're all just scrolling through like hundreds of images all the time, it can be so easy to just not spend time on an image like you were talking about at the beginning. You like to actually spend time really looking at something to figure out everything about it. And it, I think there is something about intentional camera movement photography and multiple exposure in camera photography, or layering those two together, that is another layer of making art beyond just trying to capture the image of what you see in front of you as realistically as you can, for example. And so when I look at your images, I often do think more like I'm looking at a painting, and it does actually make me stop and look at it more intently. And um, so I think that's really cool. I'm wondering if that's kind of how you think about it too.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I was saying, like it is more like abstract expressionism painting than anything else really. And I mean sometimes I will admit that I do this kind of photography because I can't paint. It's like, but I think that's me being a little bit mean to myself. But
Uh,
now I'm taking an abstract painting course, so maybe I could change that. But it is, and there was a teacher of a lot of the sort of classic abstract expressionists, who Hans Hofmann, who said, every time you make a painting, it's a reflection of yourself.
mm,
And so I feel like with this kind of photography, the ICM, the more creative kinds of multiple exposures, you are sort of putting yourself into the image at least more intentionally than you might if you were more of like a realistic or a documentarian or landscape photographer or street photographer. I happen to think that we're all, like you said, we're all doing art and we're all putting ourselves into those images. And, otherwise it would all just be AI generated. And that's what makes us different, right? Is that we're putting
right.
ourselves into those images. But I think it is even sort of more heightened with this kind of of art. And it is sort of like I'm really excited if I make an image and someone is like, "Is that a painting?" I'm like, "Yes."
Yeah.
I did it. I did it. So, yeah.
So can we talk about maybe some of the different styles within intentional camera movement? Like we've already made reference to just in general, intentional camera movement is where you're literally moving the camera in your hand as you're taking the photo. There's also you've made reference to multiple exposures that can sometimes be layered with an intentional camera movement. Something that I do when I do concert photography, when I can use a flash, which in bigger venues you can't, but in the smaller DIY venues,
Okay.
I do, and I do shutter drag photos where I'm doing, so it sounds similar, where I'm purposely moving the camera in a long exposure, but with using the flash so that it freezes the motion at one point in time. So you see the motion, the excitement, the energy of the concert, but you can also see the subject, the singer or the band, sharply at one moment in time when the flash goes off. Would you consider that another form of intentional camera movement, or are there other
mean, I
variations in
I
styles?
I think you could, like, if you wanted to. I mean, I think that, generally, like, if you went on to a group and said, "Here's my ICM," and had something like that, people would be like, "Well, what?" Because it's a little different, and usually you're capturing, like, not just a single moment in time. So one way of thinking about it is that you're capturing, like, a bunch of moments in time, and they're all there at the same time, which you have sort of in part of your image, and then part of your image is just, like, that part that the flash hits is that just that moment. But yeah, there's lots of different, there's, like, using the multiple exposures, blending ICM and non-ICM, or sometimes I call it straight because that means my kind of photography is queer. Yay! Um, but straight shots. There's this one photographer, Eric Malm, Scandinavian. He uses super long exposures, like sometimes 8 seconds, and often uses some kind of tripod because he'll get the scene sharp, but then move the camera such that not all parts of it are sharp. So like there might be some flowers that are sharp, but everything else, like the mountains behind them are blurred.
Because he's held it steady on the flowers
Yeah,
for
so
enough
he
time.
opens
Uh-huh.
the shutter, he holds it really steady. Sometimes I don't really know how he does it without a tripod, holding it steady enough to get sharp when you're wide open, with the shutter like that. But, he's practiced. So, and then he'll move it, and so then it will blur the other stuff. But those white flowers or whatever are already, in
Sort of
the
burned
data,
into the image,
burned
yeah.
into the sensor or whatever whatever the digital version of that is.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's another really cool um approach. And there are people who do basically what's kind of like panning. Like I was describing those seascapes where they're just moving really slowly and at the same pace, and just like the ocean or whatever the scene is just smears across. And then there are people, like bigger motion, smaller motion. Yeah, there's all kinds of different ways to go about it, different styles and different, there are ICMs where like, oh, that's like a crowd outside in a square, or, and people are sitting drinking coffee. Like you can tell what the scene is, but it's got a little more emotion, a little more movement to it than a
Mm.
straight photograph would be. And then there are some images where like you have just completely abstracted it entirely and you can't tell what it was.
And then those, the focus is really more the color, the emotion, the feeling,
The
the
shapes,
light, yeah,
yeah,
the
the
shapes.
light, the emotion, everything that modern kind of art asks of you. How does this make you feel? What does it make you think of? What are the illusions that are going on here with in terms of color and shape? All this.
What would you say is one of the more common, I don't want to say misunderstandings, but one of the most common types of feedback you hear about intentional camera movement photography? Would it just be like people see your image, they're like, you're doing it wrong, or
Yeah, I
something like
mean,
that?
it is. It's like you're breaking rules, and that's hard for people sometimes. I mean, it's not very hard for me, but but I'm kind of a rule breaker anyway. So, but yeah, you're breaking rules, or like you don't know what you're doing. You did that by accident, and sometimes, that's like accidental camera movement can be a thing. Like,
Like Bob Ross, a happy little accident. Now it's a
yeah,
cloud, you
exactly.
know?
Like that can happen, and it's fine. That doesn't mean it's not any less good. I don't know what's wrong with accidents that are beautiful, but
Yeah.
you know, I think it's the intentionality that sometimes people don't quite understand. I think it's hard when you've really embodied this idea that things have to be sharp to let go of that.
Hmm. Yeah. I I really keep going over in my head the thing that you said, that most photography is capturing a moment in time, and intentional camera photography is actually capturing multiple moments in the same frame. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it's really a cool way to
Yeah,
think about it for me.
it's cool. It's cool. It's fun.
So if somebody who is listening or watching wants to try intentional camera photography, what's the simplest way you would say that they should get started giving it a try?
I would say, go for it. I think it helps if you have some kind of camera where you can open the shutter for longer. So if you have a camera with manual, or a phone that has like the night mode, or an app that will hold the shutter open, and then you really just have to start playing. And it really is experimenting, and just start moving the camera. Once you know what the settings are, and we can talk about like camera settings in a little while. Once you know what to do with those, then you can just start playing. You can be like, okay, what happens if I have kind of a faster, a 13th of a second, or what if I let it open for a whole second? Like what happens? Um, if you let it open for a whole second, probably what's going to happen is it's going to be completely blown out. But then there's ways to get around that, filters and things. But you just, you want to say, okay, what happens if I move up and down with this scene? And what happens if I move side to side? What happens if my camera uses multiple exposures, and on one exposure I go side to side, and one I go up and down? What does that create? Like, sometimes it's really hard to know beforehand what's going to show up. Um, I think it takes maybe several years of doing this in order to pre-visualize what it's going to look like, just because there's so much, the camera picks up on stuff that your eye can't see, even if you were to move your eyes like
Yeah,
kind of like wacky way, like the camera picks up on stuff that you can't see. And so it takes a lot of practice, I think, to know, like, if I move my camera this much, I'm gonna get this movement. And if I move it this much, it's gonna look that way. And I want it to look that way. So I'm gonna move it more. Um, so yeah, I would just say find a camera that allows you to have a long exposure and start. Just start. And at the beginning, it's gonna be kind of a mess. It's gonna be kind of a mess. You know, if you can get through that. Like there are some people, and my sweetie is one of them, that they wanna be really good at it right at the way. And that's not gonna happen with ICM unless you're some kind of savant, right? It's gonna be messy. It's gonna be look like you just made this thing that looks, like a bunch of streaks, and it's not interesting. And on the back of your camera, it might not look great either, but once you can do some editing, it might be actually great. So, so yeah, that's my advice, is to just start playing, start experimenting, and then not be hard on yourself when it doesn't look like you want it to look.
that sounds like great advice. I mean, I imagine if you're trying pottery or painting or any type of art, the first thing you paint is not going to be a masterpiece. And this is
Probably
like
not.
that. Probably not. Probably. So you mentioned settings. So why don't we go into settings a little bit now to get intentional camera movement images? And what settings would you say are a good starting point for beginners? We've talked about longer exposure. So
Right.
can we talk about first maybe shutter speed? What's a good starting point to then move back and forth from? And what are you doing with aperture and ISO?
ISO, you want to go as low as you can go, where it's still like on a digital camera, where it's like still a real ISO, like, so like like six on my camera, it's 64. My camera has ones that are lower, but it's like a digital. It's a
Right.
digitally applied lower, because you want to get as little light in there as possible because you've got the shutter open for so long. And then similarly, um, unless you've got a neutral density filter on there, your your f-stop is going to be pretty high. So a nice place to start, I think, for shutter speed is 1/13 of a second. And depends on, how much light there is. Like if you go out in that early morning or late afternoon time, it'll be easier because there's not quite as much light, so you won't have to go quite as high for your aperture.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I would choose the shutter speed and the ISO, and then you can sort of play around with the f-stop to see how much light you can get out of there so that it's not overblown. And then I sometimes will use a faster shutter speed, like 1/15th or even 1/30th sometime, but mostly I'm at 1/13th of a second or below. And then it was a huge game changer to me when I realized about neutral density. The beginning videos that I had looked at, and the like summaries online, no one mentioned the neutral density. And I was like, how can I
Right.
do this? And then someone was like, oh, I have a
ND
three
filter,
stops
yeah.
down neutral density filter. And I was like, hallelujah. So
I
it's
know.
like a game changer, because then, I mean, I have a variable one on my camera right now that I use a lot. So it goes from 2 stops, I think, to 5. I've used down to a 10 stops down, but it's really dark when you look through that. Like, you're not seeing much of nothing. So it's a little sort of trickier to be cutting out that much light.
So I've
So
heard, just for
you
people who may not have heard of
yeah,
that filter before, I've heard of it referred to as sort of like putting sunglasses on your lens, right? Like And it's used very commonly in video, because if you're shooting video, you really need to be able to control the light.
Right, when
If you're,
it changes.
yeah,
Oh, interesting, yeah. Well, and I
but
know a lot of people use it, like, if you're shooting the sunset, like, you have a graduated one, so that you're, like, cutting out some of the light on the sunset, but, like, yeah, you can like, this is a I don't know if you can see that, there's a filter on that. You're not just seeing the lens, you're seeing sort of yeah, dark glasses. But it's consistent all the way across the lens as opposed to, like, the graduated ones that, like, are different,
right.
on the top or the bottom. So that's really nifty if you can get hold of one of those, if they're kinda pricey, um, but
There are cheaper ones, but
they're cheaper ones.
they I got a cheaper one once that was not a 10 stop, maybe it was, but it was a lot, and it was really not good quality, and it wasn't great. So
And
you
sometimes they'll like, the cheaper ones will have, like, a cast on them, like, you'll like, all your pictures sort of look blue, um, which you can sort of deal with in post, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I first got an ND filter when I was trying to do images of Minnehaha Falls during the
Oh,
day, and I wanted to smooth out the water with a longer exposure, and I just couldn't get the settings. I was like, "Why? I can't go any lower for I can't cut out any more light. What do I do?" And
yeah.
then I stumbled across, oh, you can get an ND filter, and then
Exactly,
you can, yeah,
exactly. That's exactly what's happening, in that. Yeah, and I was really excited with the ND filter because it meant I could go out and shoot in the middle of the day, and I didn't have to wait until golden hour or until the light was lower, because that also, for me personally, that corresponds with, like, dinner time with my family, and there was only so many times where I was really willing to be like, "Sorry, the light's good, gotta go, bye."
I'm out. Yeah.
So it was really nice. So I could go, any time of the day. It could be like, brightest sunshine in the whole world. And if I had a 6-stop neutral density on there, I'd be fine. And you can always, I mean, you can some cameras, I don't know what my current camera goes up to, but you can get really high f-stops, like
F20.
36,
Oh,
f36,
really?
like crazy. You're like, are you kidding me? But like my old camera did that. I don't know what my current one does because I usually don't have to do that. But you can do that. Then there's some important things to know if if you're using that tiny of an aperture, um, that any spots on your sensor will show up. So like it'll just be like, oh, you'll be like, whoo, my sensor's really dirty.
Yeah.
100 spots on it. So and I mean they're easy to get rid of in post. It's just annoying. So
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
caveat to using those really tiny apertures. Um, that sometimes you got to use because you don't have a neutral filter or you forgot it or whatever.
Hmm.
I've spent
So,
long hours
oh
on
yeah.
sensor spots.
Yeah, getting little squeegee sensor cleaner things was a life changer for me, and
Oh,
then
cool.
now
Yeah.
I have to do it so often because they get dirty, especially like you said, when you're doing longer exposures, like doing night photography, it just shows up so brightly.
Shows
It's
up.
like,
And if you
ooh,
change your lenses, I mean, like, what are you supposed to do?
yeah,
Change it in
yeah,
a vacuum? Like,
yeah.
sorry, I have to change my lens. People are like, don't change your lens. I'm like, uh, what?
That's
No.
the whole point of an interchangeable lens camera. You can change the lens.
Yeah. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna have it.
So in terms of settings, just to recap, a good starting point might be to try 1/13 of a second for the shutter speed, ISO as low as you can get it in your camera, uh, it naturally or natively, which might be 100. It might be a little lower than that, and then vary the f-stop based on how much light you are able to or need to or want to let in to get
Yeah,
the proper exposure. And then
yeah,
in terms of equipment, you said basically any camera that you can put into manual mode and do a longer exposure should be
yep,
good, right?
yep, yep,
A-
yep.
And you made
Manual or shutter priority. I know some people when they're starting out, they don't want to like futz around with the aperture. Just do it on shutter priority, and then you let the camera decide everything else. But yeah, but I mean, I like doing manual. So It's good practice anyway.
Okay. And since a lot of beginners are still starting out with their phone camera and phone cameras have gotten quite a lot better, you made reference to like if you just open the camera app on your phone, you can just press the button. There's not a way to set the shutter speed. Is there an app that you use or recommend for doing longer exposures on a phone by
Yeah,
chance?
yeah, there's a couple different ones. One is called Slow Shutter, oddly enough. And that is pretty good. It has three capture modes. I use the one called, and I use it because this is the advice I was given, called Light Trail. Then you can set an ISO, you can set the shutter speed, and you can set an f-stop on it. So that's a really good one. That one allows you to zoom in, which is nice. And then there's another app that I really like a lot, that's called Spectre, that you can vary the exposure like you do in your regular phone camera, like by tapping the screen, and you can sort of go up and down.
Like
So
tap
you
on the brightest part of the screen or
Yeah,
the darkest
or
part
the
to
darkest
change, yeah.
part, yeah, and then you can like sort of manually scroll it way down, and then you can change the number of seconds. So they have 3, 4, 5, up to 9. No, no, I only ever use it up to 9, but you can go up to 30 seconds. Um, so that's nice. Of course, like, and the one that really amuses me about Spectre is that they think you want to take a sharp photo. So they have this handy little guide that says, you're not being stable with your phone, like your phone's bouncing. Like, I know, that's what I want. So it's
Warning, you're doing it wrong.
you're doing it wrong. I'm like, yeah. So those Slow Shutter and Spectre are um, good apps that you can use. There are people who will use um, just the regular iPhone camera if you choose. If I don't really do it because I can't really figure out how to do it, but if you make it be in night mode, and then you can choose how many seconds. So you can do that. It's easy. Like the apps do that for me, so I don't have to do it. And then if you want to do multiple exposure, there's also some cool apps for doing that on your phone. I mean, there's apps for almost anything you want to do. I haven't yet found an app that on the phone that does all the things that I want it to do all at the same time. Maybe someday.
Well, I'm a relatively recent convert from Android to iPhone, so I haven't found the right app for replacing the camera that comes with it. So I'm going to try those. I appreciate those
Yeah, yeah,
recommendations. Thank you.
yeah. Give it a try. Give it a try. So that's fine. And they're good if you want to do a long exposure, like of a waterfall or whatever. Like
Uh-huh.
that will work. That's what they made it for. And
Uh-huh.
then us crazy people came along and we're like, "Woo! We can do all this other stuff." And they're like, "Okay."
Yeah, I love it. So when you talked about pre-visualization before, and that's a term that heard used in photography from when I first took a class, many years ago. But when you're out doing intentional camera movement shooting, how much is planned versus intuitive in the moment, or is it a mix?
A lot of it is intuitive in the moment. And I mean, and that's the beauty of having digital. Because I can go out there and I could be like, well, I'm going to try this, and I think it will work out the way like I think I should be able to sort of um, smooth out some of the leaves on this tree and make it, look a certain way. And so I'll try something, but and I'll usually try a few different things, and then I'll look at it on the back of my camera and I'll be like, well, that's not what I thought was going to happen, but that's cool. Let's see if we can try it again, or we can accentuate that, or do more of that or less of that to get somewhere. So a lot of it is sort of in the moment. And then as you practice, like I said, like you can get closer to that previous visualization. You get you can be like, well, I'm at this scene and what I want to really capture is like a minimalist quietness. And so what I'm going to do is move the camera in such a way that it removes like all the extraneous detail and you just get the lines or the contrast or whatever. Um, so I think it comes with some practice, and I personally always want to preserve that spontaneity, that, "Oh, I didn't know that was gonna happen." Um, or even, I have one mentor who never deletes anything, ever. Um, and I have another mentor who's like, "I can't take up the environmental resources," and so she deletes lots of stuff off of her camera before it ever gets on the computer. So there's different ways, and it's not nothing, one is not better than the other, but sometimes when you look at it on the back of your camera and you're like, "Well, that's just a piece of garbage, like, that's just terrible." And then you get it on your computer and you're like, "That's terrible." Like, it's all blown out over here and whatever, and then you, like, just sort of put it away, and, like, I'll come back months later and I'll be like, "Why didn't I follow up on this image and process it?" And it ends up being one of my favorite things that I took that that time when I was out with my camera, just because you never know, like, and maybe I didn't maybe I cropped out all that blown out part because I can't really do anything if there's no pixels at all. But, sometimes you can't tell how good an image is, um, right away. And so I guess I do tend towards the, like, keep stuff, and, like, only if it's just terrible, horrible do I delete it.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's just there is I like to preserve that spontaneity, that, like, I didn't know that was gonna happen. And then especially with, like, multiple exposures, because then you're adding a whole 'nother level of, like, not being sure what's going to happen, especially because there's these some cameras, like the camera I have, um, can put the multiple exposures together in different creative ways. So it, like, layers, like, there's a light blend mode, which will prioritize all the lighter pixels. There's a dark one. There's all these, some cameras are really, really good at this. Canons tend to be. I bought a really nice Nikon camera and then realized that I should have bought a really nice Canon camera, but it was too late. So you work with what you got. Um, but so that makes it, like, I think, some of my mentors who do that kind of work, combining ICM and multiple exposures, like, they're probably pretty good at guessing what's gonna look like.
Hmm.
But even they, like, and this is like, how there's, like, slow food? This is
Hmm.
slow photography.
Uh,
Uh, you have to stick with a subject. So because you wanna capture those things that you didn't expect that you might be able to. So you try this, and then you try this, and then you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna do this over here." And then, um, so, like, I tell this story. I went with my best friend when she turned 50. Her parents bought us a trip to Italy. And so one of the early days, she was like, "I'm gonna take a nap." I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna go out with my camera." I don't know how far I'll get. Right outside of our apartment was a church with, bells that rang every 15 minutes. So I know, and I thought I was like, "I'm gonna go out for an hour. I'll probably get, like, down the end of the street."
hmm.
45 minutes went by. I was 5 feet from our front door, still taking pictures of the same thing. But just, yeah, like, "Okay, let's do some straight ICM because I always wanna have some straight ICM, single exposures of ICM, because they're really good for texture. They've got lots of texture sometimes. They're really great base images to work with. So I always take some, I just regular, single exposure ICMs and do some multiple exposures of different kinds, different blend modes, changing the white balance. I changed the white balance in between exposures. It's super fun. You get like really wild, crazy colors that way.
I
Um,
bet.
so it's really like you don't I went on a workshop once where they were teaching us how to do this kind of multiple exposure. And they'd be like, "Okay, go off." And you'd like go off and you'd find a place of something you wanted to take a picture of. And then you'd look up, 20 minutes later and everyone's still standing in the same spot. Like that doesn't happen on photography workshops really unless you're doing like,
Right.
a long exposure of waves or something like that. But so it's spontaneity and intuitiveness. I I I really like that aspect of it. It it does mean that sometimes, and this might be why some people struggle with it, less control than some people like. Um, like, because like if you're in front of a landscape and you're like, okay, I want everything to be in focus from the foreground all the way. Like I know what got my tripod, got my settings, got my everything, for like maximum depth of field. I've got my, you know, and you can control what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of whatever your skill set is or whatever your ability to compose the photo is. But with ICM and some of these other creative techniques, there's a certain amount of control that you're never going to have. Um, and like, I like that. I think it's fun. I think it's cool, but some people are interested in more control. So,
That's a really cool way to think about it too. Yeah, because you are leaving something up to chance. Every image is going to be unique and
mhm.
not necessarily replicable.
Yeah, and that's hard too, because like you'll be like, I got this image and I want to do it again. And I know what I just did. Like it was 2 seconds ago. I haven't changed the settings. I took the camera and went like this. And you can get something sort of similar, but it's not probably gonna be the same exact.
Right.
And so there is that chance, there is that, "Oh, I swallowed in the middle of that one and not in the other one." Like, I don't know that I swallowed, but I did, and that changed the way my hand moved because, like, muscles are connected or some shit, I don't know.
Our whole
So,
body's connected. Yeah.
it's all connected, right? Um, so yeah, when your camera is an extension of your body's movements, as well as like, when things move around on the outside, like those things are sometimes moving too. Um, the image is not, if you're taking a street scene, an ICM street scene, like from one moment to the next, people will have moved and maybe they'll have moved into a better position, compositionally, and maybe not. And, like, I mean, especially with street photography, you can be like, "Can you move back so I can take that again?" And.
Yeah. I'm curious, a question just occurred to me. Does anyone do portraits using intentional camera movement? Is that like a subgenre?
Never seen anything like that. I'm trying to think if I've seen anything like that, but, I mean, you certainly could as long as people don't mind being abstracted. But, yeah,
Right,
there's
like
abstract paintings that are portraits.
right, like back in the day, someone would sit for a portrait with Picasso and, they look at his painting, they're like, "What the heck did you just do to me?"
Yeah,
Um,
right,
yeah.
exactly, and so, like, yeah, as long as your subject is okay with it, I think that definitely, and I know a lot of people. I know some people, one of my mentors, Kaisa Siren, she does a lot of ICM of dancers, which is really beautiful, because there's so much movement, right? It's inherent in dancers, and most dance photography, it's that moment. And it looks, like if you've got a ballet dancer in a beautiful arabesque, that arabesque lasted for a microsecond. Uh, Whereas if you take an ICM where you're moving the camera, um, and I did a little bit of that with my phone and my kiddo, like when I would attend dress rehearsals and things like that, where I was semi allowed to take photographs. It's super fun to do that of moving
Mm.
where the subject is moving and you're moving your camera as well. And so we're just adding more blur and then like stage lights. So it gets really cool. But I've never seen like sort of a formal
Hmm.
portrait. I might have to go look and see if there's some out there.
Yeah,
Just
I'm curious.
yeah.
Well, it occurred to me because you were talking about street photography where there are people in the frame, but
Yeah.
that's not necessarily the same, not at all
Yeah.
the same
Yeah.
really as a
And
portrait.
yeah, it's really, I mean, I really love street ICM photography because it's all about like, oh, the movement and the suggestion of a human, but you
Hmm.
haven't got um any sort of like detail or distracting detail or anything. I mean, it's sort of like those street photography that's like really high contrast. So like the person is in shadow, and so you've like kind of distilled the scene. I think ICM can do that too, where it sort of like distills the scene to like someone's wearing a really amazing. Oh, I have a photograph like this of uh, an ICM sort of street photography of someone in the winter who was crossing the street in a red coat. So you've got this like patch of red sort of going across the scene. That's super fun.
I love that. I think I'm gonna have to try some longer exposures when I'm out doing street photography next time. I'm excited
Yeah,
to try that.
yeah. And then if anyone's like, "What are you taking a picture of?" and you're like, "Here, it's yeah,
It's
you
just a
can't tell
blur.
far." No one can get upset. Well, maybe they can, but
Yeah.
I don't know that people actually get upset. I just worry about people getting upset because I really love street photography. I'm shy.
Why don't we talk about editing a little bit? You've made reference to editing with your images. How important is post-processing in ICM work, and what editing software do you use?
I I think it's pretty important. Opinions vary, and it is one of the things that happens with ICM is that you can get very low contrasty images because you're just letting so much light in. And so I use Lightroom and Photoshop because one of the sort of basic things that you can do in Lightroom is to pump up the blacks and the whites so that you can get some of that contrast back. It's in there.
Hmm.
Uh, and so you can get some of that. And then I can use Lightroom for a lot. Like these images that we have, they have so much information in them and you can really push things really far even just with Lightroom. And so you can get totally different moods if you're like, well, this turned out a little cheerier than I want and I want something a little more somber. Uh,
Uh-huh.
you can really change the colors. You can change the white balance. You can, yeah, take away all the bright spots or whatever you want to do. Certainly, getting rid of censor spots is pretty darn easy these days. Lightroom, and then in Photoshop, um, took me a long time to start using it to get used to it. But once I started getting more into it, what I use it for is for layering my images on top of each other. Usually the same one, but sometimes different ones. Even like in camera multiple exposures, I will make into even more multiple exposures with Photoshop. And then you can blend things in different ways and use some of the creative color techniques to enhance colors, change colors. So I do that. I use I use that a lot. Sometimes you just get an image and you make a few tweaks in Photoshop and you're or in Lightroom, and I'm like, oh, I'm done. And sometimes it's several hours of work in Photoshop with 14, 20 layers.
Layers.
Yeah,
Wow.
layers. Yeah, I mean, it can get gnarly. And that was one thing I was gonna say with styles, which this particular style uses Photoshop a lot. It's a style of ICM photography called Pep Ventosa technique. Pep Ventosa is a photographer. Um, and it's where it's not, you're taking straight images, but you're moving in between each of the exposures. So, and you can do it in camera, but most people do it in Photoshop. So you take a picture, like the classic is of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Stand a certain distance from the tree, you take a picture of the tree. You move a couple feet, you take another picture of the tree, and you go all the way around the tree like that at a sort of more or less equal distance from the tree. And then you put it on, you take all of those exposures and you make them layers in Photoshop. And then you blend them with some of the different blending modes, different opacities of each. And so that people consider that intentional camera movement because you've moved the camera intentionally sort of all the way around. And it produces a much more sort of impressionistic image of the tree or whatever the thing is. Um, and so that's something that a lot of people like will use Photoshop for.
Mm-hmm.
And I know someone who uses that technique even though she's not doing Pep Ventosa. So she takes a single image in Lightroom and she will copy that image a bunch of different times and apply different settings.
Mm.
And then she puts all of those into Photoshop in layers and then blends them. So it's the same photograph, but like replicated in different, with different colors, different like dark, some of them are really dark, some of them are super contrasty, less contrasty, and then you can sort of do some of these creative techniques in Photoshop. And Photoshop and Lightroom are incredibly powerful,
Mm-hmm.
incredibly expensive pieces of software.
Yeah,
So yeah, so that's what I use.
that's
Except
so
for my
cool.
iPhone ones. There's apps on your iPhone that you can use to
Okay.
like Snapseed. It's great. It's a great editing tool on your phone.
Yeah, I like Snapseed too. That's so cool. What you're describing with doing that work in Photoshop, like those are all techniques that individually I've used for different things, but I haven't put them together to create like a image, or multi-exposure kind of thing. That I definitely, this is inspiring me to want to try it. I'm really
Yeah,
excited.
it's super fun. It's super interesting. It's again huge on the experimentation front. Um, like say like what if I blend these two images using the darken mode or the multiply mode to blend them. And, just like seeing like, oh, do I like that? Oh, do I really hate that? Like, ooh, is there something there? Is there some that I can keep going down the rabbit hole with this idea? I love post processing. Some people hate post processing, and some
Yeah,
people will tell you. We've all heard the things that people say, like if you didn't get it right in camera, you did it wrong. Like whatever.
right.
Go drink a beer. Like, just leave us to so if you love post processing, if it gets your creative juices flowing, this is a great place for that. Um, to just really like let go also of like even the rules in Photoshop. Like, oh, don't push the texture too much, or don't add a bunch of blacks because it's gonna, make it all black. There's these rules that we hear floating out there about how to use programs that you can break those rules. It's okay. The people
Yeah.
who get it will get it, and the people who are like, shouldn't have done that, can go have a beer and relax.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I'm aware of that there are different blending modes in Photoshop, and when you bring in multiple images from Lightroom into Photoshop, you can try different blending modes. You can do like my knowledge. I'm use Lightroom 99% of the time now. I used to use Photoshop more, but as more of the things that I used to have to do in Photoshop are now doable in Lightroom, I
Yeah.
barely use Photoshop these days. But there is, like you said, so much power there. And when I like, for example, with real estate photography, I'll do a bracketed shot of
Mhm.
different, different exposures to get lighter light, to get more dynamic range, and then I'll blend them in Photoshop. And I'm just
Yeah.
looking for the most sort of, you can actually do it, most of it right in Lightroom now too. But like, I just want the most sort of like, what's the one setting I need to know to get this done, and some people don't like these, like you said, don't like the editing. They're just like, oh, I hate this. I just want to be able to press the button and be done. It is an art. Like you can create art with all these different types of blending modes, with different ways of bringing images together, either both in camera and then after. Yeah, it's such a, um, you're leaving so much on the table if you're not even trying, or if you're just writing off all of these types of different ways that you can work with your images.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun.
So, one thing I wanted to ask about, and as we know, we live in a capitalist society. This is a very expensive hobby.
Mhm.
Buying camera
Tell me
equipment
about
is
it.
not cheap, and we're all encouraged to monetize everything in our lives, anyways. But so, do people make money doing intentional camera movement photography? And can you? And if so,
Think
how?
yes, I think people do. I think there are people who have not me, who have relationships with galleries that show their work. And there is one of the good things about when I really got into ICM photography is basically at the same time a magazine was started. It's an online magazine. It's called ICM Photo Magazine. And they pay for publishing your photographs. So there's always there's that. There's your parents. Your parents will pay you for
Your parents will buy your print.
buy you a print. Um yeah, and so I have a website. I don't use Instagram. I got really sick of the reels and the not seeing the people. I was like putting my stuff out there, but I felt like I needed to interact with people, but I never saw the people's whose art I wanted to see. I saw, whatever else the algorithm decided I should see. So I don't use Instagram, but a lot of people do use Instagram and Facebook. I will put stuff on Blue Sky. Sometimes, every once in a while I'll get someone who wants to buy a print through my website. That is nice, but I think the real way probably to monetize is to get representation with a gallery. And, some people are, it's a hustle, right? It's a hustle. Being an artist is there's hustle there. And I'm not very good at that. I'm not a very good like self-promoter and all that stuff. But you can do it. And like I have a good friend in the Twin Cities who does a lot of ICM, and she like enters all of the, like, she just has something in a Hopkins show. So she enters all of the call for artists things into, to sort of try and she's sort of a similar place as I am with her development of her art, but she's just, really working that angle of developing relationships with possible galleries, and having that representation and that kind of exposure, I think is a way to make some money. Like, unless you're like one of the greats, like, is it a lot of money? Maybe not. I mean, I also do know, so I have my mentor that started the ICM photography magazine. She runs a lot of workshops to teach people how to do this stuff. Um, some other mentors who live in England, they do travel workshops. I think they've just scaled back, but at some point they were running like 5 travel workshops, and of photographers who want to use this technique, like in France or in Morocco or whatever. And so, like, doing those kind of business things, they also started a kind of a community. It's a subscription based kind of thing, and there's a lot of tutorials on there. You can get feedback. They have a gallery where you can post your images, like, when you really like them and you just want people to say, "That's beautiful," like, because we all need that, like, feedback,
Yeah.
that serotonin boost.
Yeah.
Uh, and then you get it there with, like, a bunch of people who also do, like, not art that looks like yours, but art that uses the approaches that you use, which are different from other ones. Um, and then there's lectures from, other artists, all kinds of mixed media painters, also, like, all doing sort of this kind of abstract kind of work, so you can learn from them. And that's a subscription, so people they're making money doing that, and so having these other streams of income that are related to the art, but aren't necessarily just, selling someone a print, or selling your art through a gallery or selling your art on a website, or having a podcast that has, uh, subscribers or ads could
So
monetize
yeah,
it. But
so it sounds very, very similar to other types of photography in that sense. You're probably not going to get many people to hire you to do their wedding photography using ICM, but things or commercial photography, although maybe. But you kind of have to hustle to create your opportunities. Like you could be out selling prints at the Powderhorn
yeah,
Arts Festival or something
yeah,
and
it's
things
arts
like that.
festivals and all those kinds of things. I just never know, like, how much people actually sell, and so I've paid for a bunch of prints to be made.
Yeah,
I don't know,
that's
it's just a large capital outlay up front to hopefully get some people to buy some. I
yeah.
don't know.
I know the struggle.
Scary.
I've only tried doing that a couple times, and I ended up spending more than I made to make all the prints. And like you said, yeah, it's a you have to really sort of work at it for a while, probably to get that
Yeah,
balance right.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, so, you
Well,
know
we've gone over an hour,
okay,
and
sorry, yes.
I never was not bored for a second. So, but I think to respect your time and to so that we can probably both eat dinner and see our families and stuff. Why don't we wrap it up with just anything else that you would want to say that we didn't cover, and then where can people see your work if they want to?
Yeah, people can see my work on my website, photoslasirena.com, and that's photos spelled in Spanish, so it's just an Fotos, photos. La sirena is means mermaid, and the name comes from I used to have really brightly colored hair. It's like blue and purple and green and all these, and my nephew was trying to insult me, and he was like, "You're a failed mermaid." So I was like, "That's great." So that's what I call myself, La Sirena. So yeah, people can see that there. And I guess the last thing I would really want to say is, if anything about this is interesting or like you're like, wow, I never thought you could do that. I really encourage people to give it a try. The ICM photo mag always has a little tutorial in the back from two really great ICM photographers, Kaisa Siren, um, and Morag. Oh, I'm forgetting her last name. Um, anyway, the two of them do a little page in that magazine on like a little tutorial. And then you can submit images for their and they'll give you feedback. So it's a really nice, and there's a Facebook community, an ICM Photo Mag Facebook community where you can post stuff and say, what should I do differently, or what's gone wrong here, or I really love this image, I hope you do too. Whatever you want. Like, so there's definitely communities out there. There's uh lots of different places where people can help you. You can reach out to me, certainly, if you're local. Go out with you and your camera if you want to, try some ICM and get feedback or get pointers. I really just encourage people to give it a try and have a play, as that there's a lot of British ICM photographers. And they're like, we're going to go out for a play. That's how they say, we're going to for a play.
What does
And
that mean?
it
Go out
just
for a
means
play.
like out to play around and screw around and, yeah, like
Okay.
have experiment about. Have a play with your camera and just try and tamp down that part of your brain that wants things to be really beautiful right away. And approach it with like curiosity and excitement and experimentation. And I think it's a really fun way to look at the world. And some of your friends might be like, why? What are you doing? Why just like this? But if they stick with you, and your real friends will, they will get there. I have like a dear, dear, dear friend who was like, I don't really understand what you're doing. And now she's got prints in her house of mine with these techniques. So it'll be
Amazing.
okay. It'll be okay.
I love that. So again, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk about intentional camera movement and multiple exposure photography. And I think it's something that probably a lot of people are less familiar with than other types of photography. So I'm really excited and love this conversation. And I guess I'll just close by saying, if you've listened this far, please follow Daniela's website and reach out if you're interested, as she said. And if you've listened this far, please follow, like, subscribe, do all the things. Forget the picture. And if you have a few bucks, support us on Patreon so that we can keep this going. So thank you once again.
Thank you.